When HOA President Karen stabbed 7-year-old Emma mid-flight with a pen, she thought she'd simply silenced an annoying child who was disturbing her important business trip. But the captain who immediately diverted the plane was Emma's father, a man who had just discovered in the most traumatic way possible that he had a daughter he never knew existed. Now Karen would learn the hard way that some mistakes cost absolutely everything. Before I share this complete emotional story with you, please take a moment to comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Also, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories like this one. The scream that tore through the cabin of Flight 447 was like a knife slicing through silk, sharp, unexpected, and absolutely terrifying. In that instant, Sarah Mitchell's entire world shattered completely in the space between one heartbeat and the next. One moment, her 7-year-old daughter, Emma, was sleeping peacefully against the airplane window. Her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched tightly to her chest, her face serene and innocent. The next moment, blood was blooming across Emma's pale blue dress like a terrible flower, spreading rapidly, and a woman in an expensive designer business suit was standing over them in the aisle, a ballpoint pen dripping red blood in her trembling hand. "She kept kicking my seat," the woman hissed, her face twisted with rage and indignation. "Little brat kept kicking my seat for 20 minutes straight. It was time someone taught her a lesson." Time seemed to stop completely. Sarah's mind couldn't process what her eyes were seeing. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. Emma's eyes were wide with shock and confusion, her small mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled suddenly from water, trying to understand what had just happened to her. The pen had struck her in the shoulder, but the sight of her daughter's blood, so much blood on that pale blue dress, made Sarah's vision blur with tears and overwhelming fury. "You stabbed my baby," Sarah whispered at first, her voice cracking with disbelief. Then louder, much louder. "You stabbed my child! You stabbed my daughter!" The entire cabin erupted into complete chaos. Passengers jumped from their seats in shock. A flight attendant came running frantically down the aisle, her face pale, but Sarah saw none of it, heard none of the commotion. Her entire universe had narrowed to just two things: Emma's pale, frightened face and the spreading crimson stain on her dress. The woman, Karen Hendricks, her nameplate had read when she'd boarded earlier with her expensive leather briefcase full of HOA conference materials, stepped back suddenly, finally realizing the magnitude of what she'd just done. "She wouldn't stop kicking," Karen said defensively, her voice rising. "I asked her to stop. I asked nicely several times. She kept doing it anyway." "She's 7 years old." Sarah's hands shook violently as she pressed a blanket against Emma's wound, trying desperately to stop the bleeding. "She's a baby. She's just a little girl." "I'm the president of Meadowbrook HOA," Karen said, her voice rising even higher with defensive anger. "I have an extremely important conference to attend. I paid good money for a business-class seat. I shouldn't have to deal with—" A flight attendant finally reached them, her face white with shock. "Ma'am, step back right now," she said firmly to Karen. But Karen wasn't finished with her justifications. "Do you know who I am?" she demanded loudly. "I'm on the board of 3 different homeowners associations. I have connections throughout this state. That child was disrupting my entire flight, and I demand—" "You demand?" A male passenger stood up from his seat, his face bright red with anger. "You stabbed a little girl! What kind of monster stabs a child?" Other voices joined in quickly, the cabin filled with outrage, with demands that Karen be immediately restrained, that the plane land as soon as possible. But Sarah heard absolutely none of it. She was completely focused on Emma, who had started to cry. Small, frightened whimpers that broke Sarah's heart into smaller and smaller pieces. "Mommy, it hurts," Emma sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "Why did she hurt me? What did I do wrong?" "I know, baby. I know it hurts." Sarah's own tears fell onto her daughter's dark hair. "You didn't do anything wrong. Nothing. You're going to be okay. I promise you're going to be okay, sweetheart. The flight attendant spoke urgently into her radio, her voice tight. Code red in business class. We need the captain immediately. Child injured by another passenger. Request immediate emergency landing. Sarah barely registered the words. Her mind was spinning, drowning in feelings of helplessness and rage. They were 30,000 feet in the air. Her daughter was bleeding from a stab wound, and there was absolutely nothing she could do except hold her tight and pray desperately that help would come soon. Then a voice came over the intercom system, a voice that was somehow familiar in a way that made Sarah's breath catch painfully in her throat. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Sarah's head snapped up instantly. That voice. She knew that voice. It couldn't be, but she knew it. We've had a serious incident in the cabin, the captain continued, his voice professional and calm despite the emergency. Emergency medical personnel will be meeting us on the ground. We're diverting immediately to Denver International Airport, landing in approximately 20 minutes. Flight attendants, prepare for emergency protocols. It couldn't possibly be him. 8 long years had passed. 8 years since Sarah had walked away from the only man she'd ever truly loved because she'd been young and terrified and convinced she wasn't good enough for him. The cockpit door opened. A man in a captain's uniform stepped into the cabin, and Sarah's world tilted sideways again. James Carter, Emma's father. The man Sarah had left behind without any real explanation, too ashamed to admit her pregnancy, too afraid he'd see her and the baby as a trap she'd deliberately set. His eyes swept the cabin professionally, assessing the situation with trained efficiency. Then they landed on Sarah, on Emma, on the blood spreading across the little girl's dress. His face went completely white. All the color drained from it instantly. For 3 long seconds, he stood frozen in place, unable to move. Then his professional training took over. He strode down the aisle purposefully, his jaw set, his hands steady and controlled. But Sarah could see the tremor in his shoulders, could see the way his eyes couldn't leave Emma's small face. "Status report," he said to the flight attendant in a clipped professional voice. But his gaze was locked completely on the small girl bleeding in Sarah's arms. "Penetrating wound to the shoulder from a pen," the flight attendant reported. "Bleeding is controlled with pressure. The child is conscious and responsive." James knelt beside them in the aisle. Up close, Sarah could see the lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, the gray threading through his dark hair that showed the passage of time. But his hands were gentle as he reached carefully toward Emma. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said softly, his voice infinitely kind. "I'm Captain Carter. Can you tell me your name?" Emma's lip trembled. "Emma," she whispered. "Emma Mitchell." Something flickered across James's face. Recognition, calculation, confusion. His eyes met Sarah's, and in them she saw 8 years of questions, of hurt, of longing he'd never been able to express. But there was something else there, too, a growing suspicion that made Sarah's throat tighten with fear and hope. "Emma," he repeated slowly, as if tasting the name. His gaze dropped to the stuffed rabbit in her lap, then to the small silver bracelet on her wrist that read Emma Rose Carter in tiny engraved letters. The bracelet Sarah had bought in a moment of weakness, unable to completely erase James from their daughter's life. James saw it. His entire body went very still. "How old are you, Emma?" His voice was barely above a whisper. 7, Emma answered, her tears slowing a bit as she became fascinated by this kind pilot despite her pain. "I'll be 8 in March." March. James's eyes closed briefly. When they opened again, they were blazing with emotions Sarah couldn't fully name. Joy, anger, confusion, and love all mixed together. He looked at Sarah, and she could see him doing the math in his head, putting the pieces together like a puzzle. "Is she—" he started to ask, unable to finish the question. "Yes," Sarah whispered, her own tears streaming freely now. "She's yours. Emma is your daughter." The world stopped completely again. James stared at Emma like she was a miracle he'd stopped believing in years ago. His hand hovered near her face, wanting to touch her, afraid she might disappear if he did. "My daughter," he breathed in wonder. "I have a daughter. I have a child." "I'm sorry," Sarah choked out. "I'm so sorry, James. I was scared and young and stupid." "I thought," James started, but he couldn't finish. Behind them, Karen Hendricks made what would turn out to be the worst mistake of her entire life. "Oh, for God's sake, can we focus on the real problem here?" she snapped, her voice cutting through the emotional moment. She'd been held firmly in her seat by two large male passengers, but her voice still carried that same entitled edge. The child was being extremely disruptive for the entire flight. She needed to be disciplined properly. If the mother had been doing her job correctly, none of this would have been necessary. James stood slowly. The transformation was absolutely terrifying to witness. The gentle man who'd been kneeling beside his newfound daughter vanished instantly, replaced by something cold and dangerous and barely controlled. "What did you say?" His voice was quiet, deadly calm. Karen seemed to finally realize her error, but pride and entitlement wouldn't let her back down. "I said the child needed proper discipline. I'm the president of 3 HOAs. I know all about maintaining order and enforcing rules when people refuse to follow them. That child was kicking my seat repeatedly for 20 minutes straight. 20 full minutes. Her mother did absolutely nothing to stop her. So I—" "You stabbed a 7-year-old girl," James interrupted, his voice ice cold. "I tapped her with a pen to get her attention," Karen corrected defensively. "If she hadn't been so dramatic about it—" James took a step forward. 2 flight attendants moved instinctively to intercept him, but something in his eyes, something wild and barely controlled, made them hesitate and step back. "You stabbed my daughter," James said, each word falling like a hammer. "My daughter, who I just learned existed 60 seconds ago. My daughter who is bleeding because you decided your personal comfort mattered more than a child's safety. You're—" Karen's face went pale. "I didn't know she was—" "It wouldn't matter if she belonged to a complete stranger," James cut her off, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. "But she's mine. She's my child, and you hurt her." The entire cabin had gone completely silent. Every single passenger watched, transfixed by the drama unfolding. Karen tried to rally her composure. "I want a lawyer. You can't threaten me like this. I'll sue the airline. I'll sue you personally. Do you know who I am?" James smiled, but it was not a kind smile. "I know exactly who you are, Mrs. Hendricks. Karen Hendricks, president of Meadowbrook HOA, board member of Sunset Hills and Riverside Communities. You live at 847 Maple Drive. You have a daughter named Christine at Stanford University, a son named Robert at Harvard. Your husband, Paul, is a corporate attorney at Morgan & Associates." Karen's face went from pale to gray. "How do you possibly know all that?" "I'm a pilot, Mrs. Hendricks," James said quietly. "We have access to systems, to passenger information, to databases, and right now, every law enforcement agency between here and Denver is receiving your name, your complete details, and the charges being filed against you, assault with a deadly weapon against a minor child." "It was just a pen," Karen protested weakly. "You used it as a weapon against a child," James said, leaning down so his face was level with hers. "And when we land in Denver, you're going to learn something important. You're going to learn that there are real consequences for your actions, not HOA fines or strongly worded letters. Real consequences. Prison, Mrs. Hendricks. You're going to prison for what you did to my daughter." The 20 minutes until landing were the longest of Sarah's entire life. James had to return to the cockpit to bring the plane down safely, but not before kneeling once more beside Emma. "I have to fly the plane now, sweetheart," he told her gently. "But when we land, I'm not going anywhere. I promise you that. I'm staying right here with you." Emma, brave despite everything she'd been through, managed a small smile. "You're really my daddy?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. James's face crumpled with emotion. He pressed his forehead gently against hers. Yeah, baby, I'm really your daddy. And I'm so sorry I wasn't here before. I'm sorry I missed so much. It's okay, Emma whispered. You're here now. That's what matters. Sarah watched them together, her heart simultaneously breaking and healing. This moment, this meeting she'd feared and hoped for and dreaded for 7 years, was happening in the worst possible circumstances. But watching James with Emma, seeing the instant, fierce love in his eyes, she knew with absolute certainty that she'd made a terrible mistake in keeping them apart for so long. James stood, his eyes meeting Sarah's over Emma's head. There was hurt there, anger, betrayal. But there was also something else. Understanding, perhaps, or at least the promise of it eventually. We'll talk, he said quietly. But first, let's get her safe and taken care of. The landing was remarkably smooth despite the emergency situation. The moment the plane came to a complete stop, EMTs rushed aboard with their equipment. They stabilized Emma quickly, checked her vital signs, confirmed that the wound was painful but thankfully not life-threatening. The pen had missed anything vital: arteries, bones, organs. You're one very lucky little girl, the lead paramedic told Emma with a warm smile. And brave, too. Very, very brave. But Emma wasn't looking at the paramedic. Her eyes were searching the cabin for James, who had emerged from the cockpit and was pushing through the crowd of passengers to reach her. "Daddy!" she called out, and the word came so naturally it brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. James gathered them both in his arms, careful of Emma's injury, but desperate to hold them close. "I've got you," he murmured. "Both of you. I've got you now." Behind them, police officers boarded the plane with handcuffs ready. They approached Karen Hendricks with serious expressions. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon against a minor child." Karen's carefully maintained composure finally cracked completely. "Wait, please wait," she said, her voice shaking. "It was an accident. I didn't mean to actually hurt her seriously. I just wanted her to stop kicking my seat. I just wanted some peace." "You stabbed a child with a pen," the officer said flatly. "Let's go." As they led her away in handcuffs, Karen looked back at Emma with something that might have been regret or remorse. But it was far too late for regret. Far too late for explanations or apologies. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. At the hospital, doctors confirmed what the paramedics had said. Emma would be absolutely fine. Stitches, antibiotics, careful monitoring for any signs of infection. But children were remarkably resilient, they assured Sarah and James. She would heal completely with time. "Will I have a scar?" Emma asked, her voice small and worried. James sat beside her hospital bed, holding her small hand like he would never let go. "Maybe a small one," he admitted, "but scars are okay, sweetheart. They show you survived something difficult. They show you're strong." "Will people ask me about it?" Emma wondered. "Probably," James smiled sadly. "And when they do, you can tell them you have a really cool dad who's a pilot and who loves you more than anything in the world." Emma giggled, then immediately winced. "Don't make me laugh. It hurts when I laugh." "Sorry, baby girl." He kissed her forehead tenderly. "Rest now. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." Sarah watched from the doorway, physically and emotionally exhausted. When Emma finally dozed off to sleep, James stood and joined Sarah in the hallway outside the room. They stood in silence for a long, heavy moment. 8 years stretched between them like an ocean, vast, deep, seemingly impossible to cross. "Why?" James finally asked, his voice rough with pain. "Why didn't you tell me, Sarah? Why did you just disappear?" Sarah's tears returned. "I was 22 years old. You were building your career, chasing your dreams of being a pilot. We'd only been together for 6 months. I convinced myself you'd see the baby as a trap I'd set for you, that you'd resent me, that I'd be ruining your entire life." "So you just disappeared," James said, his voice accusing. "You vanished without a trace." "I left a note," Sarah said weakly. "A stupid, cowardly note that explained nothing. I was so scared, James. My mother raised me alone after my dad left when I was 3. I knew exactly how hard it was. I thought, if I just vanished from your life, you could keep living your dream without being trapped." "My dream?" James laughed bitterly. "Sarah, you were my dream. You were everything I wanted. You vanished, and I spent months trying to find you. I hired private investigators. I called every single person we knew. You just disappeared like you'd never existed." "I moved to Oregon," Sarah admitted. "Changed my phone number, started completely over, and had our daughter alone." "Alone," James repeated, the word accusing and broken. "You had her alone." "Yes," Sarah met his eyes. "And every single day I wondered if I'd made the right choice. Every milestone, her first word, her first steps, her first day of school. I thought about you. I wondered what you'd think, what you'd say. I wore your old shirt when I went into labor because I wanted some part of you there with me. I gave her your last name as her middle name because I couldn't bear to erase you completely from our lives." "But you did erase me," James said quietly. "You erased me from 7 years of her life. 7 years I can never get back." "I know," Sarah's voice cracked. "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry, James. I was young and stupid and scared. I robbed you of being her father. I robbed her of knowing you, and I can never, ever make that right." James leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "I've dated over the years, tried to move on, but no one ever measured up to what we had. I kept comparing everyone to a ghost, to a memory of you. James, I'm so angry right now I can barely see straight," he continued. "But I'm also terrified that if I express that anger fully, you'll disappear again. You'll take Emma and vanish, and this time I'll never find you." "I won't run," Sarah promised firmly. "Never again. Whatever you need, time, space, therapy, lawyers, custody arrangements, I'll do it. I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you and to Emma, both of you." "I don't want revenge," James said quietly. "I don't want to punish you. I just want my daughter. I want to know her. I want to be her father for real, not just genetically." "You already are," Sarah smiled through her tears. "Did you see her face when she called you Daddy? She's been waiting for you her whole life. I've been waiting for you too." They stood together in that sterile hospital hallway, two people who'd loved and lost and found each other again in the absolute worst possible way. There was so much to figure out, so many difficult conversations still to have. But for now, there was Emma, sleeping peacefully in the next room. "Can I stay?" James asked hesitantly. "Tonight, I mean. With her?" "James, you don't have to ask permission," Sarah said. "She's your daughter." "Is she?" His eyes searched Sarah's face. "Legally, I mean. Am I on her birth certificate?" Sarah nodded. "I might have been a complete coward about telling you, but I couldn't leave you off her birth certificate completely. Your name is there. You're listed as her father." Something in James's expression softened. "Thank you for that, at least." Karen Hendricks's arrest made national news within hours. "HOA president stabs child on flight," ran the headlines across every major news outlet. Social media absolutely exploded with outrage. Her HOAs immediately removed her from all positions. Her so-called friends abandoned her completely. Her expensive lawyer fought desperately for bail, but the judge denied it without hesitation. "You used a writing instrument as a weapon against a 7-year-old child," the judge said sternly during her bail hearing. "You showed absolutely no remorse for your actions. You prioritized your personal comfort over a child's safety and well-being. Bail is denied." Karen's trial was scheduled for 3 months away. In the meantime, she sat alone in a jail cell with nothing but her regrets for company. Her husband, Paul, filed for divorce within 2 weeks. Her children stopped visiting after the first week, unable to face what their mother had become. The life she'd built so carefully, the power, the prestige, the control she'd wielded over others, crumbled like sand in the wind. Emma, meanwhile, recovered quickly. Children heal fast, both physically and emotionally, the doctors said. But Sarah knew it wasn't just physical healing happening. Emma absolutely bloomed under James's constant attention and love. He took 2 full weeks off from work, spending every single moment getting to know his daughter. They discovered they both loved science fiction movies, strawberry ice cream with chocolate sauce, and terrible dad jokes that made Sarah groan. When Emma laughed at his awful puns, Sarah's heart would soar and break simultaneously. "Tell me about her," James said one night after Emma had gone to bed. They sat on Sarah's couch, careful space between them. "Everything. I want to know absolutely everything I missed." So Sarah told him about the pregnancy, the morning sickness that lasted all day, the fear she'd felt, the loneliness. She told him about labor, about holding Emma for the very first time, about the overwhelming love that made every hardship worth it. She told him about Emma's first word, mama, her first steps at 10 months old, her obsession with butterflies at age 4, her recent fascination with astronomy that started at age 6. "She wants to be an astronaut," Sarah said. "Or a pilot like you? She's always been fascinated by flying." James's eyes filled with tears. "She knows about me. I told her stories," Sarah admitted. "Not the truth. I'm ashamed of that. But I told her that her daddy was a pilot who had to be away for work, that he loved her even though he couldn't be there. I couldn't bear for her to think you didn't want her." "I would have wanted her," James said fiercely. "I would have wanted both of you. Always. I know that now." Sarah reached for his hand hesitantly. To her relief, he let her take it. "I'm sorry. I didn't know it then." They sat in silence, hands linked, processing 8 years of lost time together. "Where do we go from here?" Sarah finally asked. James looked at her, really looked at her. "I don't know exactly. I'm still angry. I'm still hurt. But I also still love you, Sarah. I've loved you for 8 years. That doesn't just disappear overnight." "I love you too," Sarah whispered. "I never stopped loving you." "Then we'll figure it out together this time." James squeezed her hand. "I want to be in Emma's life fully. I want custody arrangements worked out legally. I want to be involved in school decisions, holidays, everything, all of it." "Yes," Sarah agreed immediately. "Anything you want." "And us," James hesitated. "We need to take it slow, get to know each other again as the people we are now. See if what we had is still there beneath all the hurt." "It is," Sarah said confidently. "I know it is." "Maybe." James smiled sadly. "But we're different people now than we were at 22. We need time to figure out who we are together now." Over the following weeks and months, they established a new routine that worked for everyone. James moved to Oregon permanently, taking a position with a regional airline that allowed him to be home much more often than his previous job. He got an apartment near Sarah's house, close enough to see Emma every single day, but separate enough to maintain appropriate boundaries while they figured things out. They went to family therapy together, working through the incredibly complicated emotions of lost time and tentative second chances. Emma thrived under the attention. Having her father actively in her life filled something Sarah hadn't even realized was missing before. James taught Emma about flying and aerodynamics. He took her to air shows. He helped with her homework. He was patient, loving, present, everything Sarah had always known he would be. And slowly, carefully, Sarah and James rebuilt what they'd lost 8 years ago. It wasn't easy by any means. There were arguments about the past, tears over lost time, moments when the hurt felt too big to overcome. But they persisted, for Emma, for themselves, for the love that had never really died. 3 months after the incident, Karen Hendricks went to trial. The prosecution had an absolutely overwhelming case. Dozens of eyewitnesses from the plane, clear video footage from cabin cameras, Emma's detailed medical records, testimony from the EMTs and doctors. Karen's expensive lawyer tried to argue temporary insanity, extreme stress from her job, diminished capacity due to sleep deprivation. None of it worked. The evidence was too clear, too damning. James and Sarah debated whether to attend the trial, whether to subject Emma to the legal proceedings. In the end, they decided to go together, but they left Emma with Sarah's mother. "She needs to know that justice happens," James said, "that people who hurt others face real consequences." The courtroom was packed every single day. News cameras lined the hallways outside. Karen looked so much smaller than Sarah remembered, diminished by her orange jumpsuit and the weight of what she'd done. When it was Sarah's turn to testify, she spoke clearly about that day on the plane, about watching her daughter get stabbed, about the blood and the fear and the complete helplessness. "What did the defendant say after she stabbed your daughter?" the prosecutor asked. "She said Emma deserved it for kicking her seat." Sarah's voice was steady despite the emotion. "She said she was an HOA president and shouldn't have to deal with children on flights." Gasps filled the courtroom. The jury looked horrified. When James testified, he was calm but intense. "My daughter, who I had just learned existed, was bleeding," he said. And the defendant showed absolutely no remorse, only anger that her flight had been disrupted. The defense attorney tried desperately to paint Karen as a stressed professional who'd made one terrible mistake under pressure. But on cross-examination, the prosecutor destroyed that narrative completely. "Mrs. Hendricks, you've filed 247 formal complaints with your various HOAs against neighbors in just the past 5 years, the prosecutor said. "You've called the police on children playing outside. You've sued 3 different families for minor infractions. Does that sound like someone who made one mistake under stress?" Karen had no answer. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous and swift. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing came 1 week later. Emma, now 8 years old, asked to be there. Sarah and James debated extensively, but Emma was absolutely insistent. "She hurt me," Emma said, her voice strong despite her small size. "I want to see what happens to people who hurt kids." So they went together. Emma sat between her parents, their hands linked together in support. The judge was a stern woman in her 60s. She looked at Karen with absolutely no sympathy in her expression. "Mrs. Hendricks, you used your position, your privilege, and your sense of entitlement to justify violence against an innocent child," the judge said. "You showed no remorse whatsoever. You blamed the victim. You prioritized your comfort over a child's safety." Karen finally began to cry. "For the crime of assault with a deadly weapon against a minor, I sentence you to 8 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation," the judge declared. "You will also pay full restitution for all medical bills, therapy costs, and damages to the victims. You are permanently prohibited from holding any HOA position or board membership for life, and you will complete extensive anger management and psychological counseling." 8 years. Karen would serve 8 years, the same age as Emma, justice in its own poetic way. As they left the courthouse together, Emma tugged on James's hand. "Daddy, is 8 years a long time?" she asked. James knelt beside her. "Yeah, baby. It's a very long time." "Good." Emma's voice was firm and certain, "because what she did was very, very bad." "It was," James agreed, pulling her into a hug. "But you know what? You're okay now. You're safe. And you have Mom and me, and we're never going to let anyone hurt you again, ever." Emma threw her small arms around his neck. "I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Emma Rose." James held her tight, his eyes meeting Sarah's over their daughter's head. In his gaze, Sarah saw forgiveness. Maybe not complete yet, but present and growing stronger every day. 2 years later, Sarah stood in the cockpit of Flight 739, watching James work the controls with practiced ease. They'd remarried 6 months earlier in a small, intimate ceremony, with Emma serving proudly as their flower girl. It hadn't been an easy journey. The road to forgiveness and rebuilding trust was long and often painful, but they'd walked it together, one difficult step at a time. Emma, now 10 years old, sat in the jump seat wearing headphones that were comically too big for her head. She was grinning as her father explained the various instruments on the control panel. She'd flown with him dozens of times by now, and her dream of becoming a pilot grew stronger with each trip. "See that there?" James pointed. "That's the altimeter. It tells us how high we're flying." 30,000 feet, Emma read proudly. She'd been reading since age 4, James had learned. Gifted in both math and science. His daughter, their daughter. "That's exactly right." James ruffled her hair affectionately. "Smart girl." "She gets it from you," Sarah said, settling into the observer's seat. "And from you," James countered immediately. "Her compassion, her strength, her kindness, that's all you." They'd had this gentle argument before many times. It always ended the same way, with both of them agreeing that Emma was the very best parts of both of them. "Daddy?" Emma asked suddenly, her voice thoughtful. "Do you ever think about that lady? The one who hurt me on the plane?" James and Sarah exchanged meaningful glances. They'd been completely honest with Emma about what had happened, answering her questions as she grew old enough to understand more. "Sometimes," James admitted carefully. "Why do you ask?" "I think about her too." Emma's face was thoughtful beyond her years. "I feel sad for her. She made a really, really bad choice. And now she's in prison for a long time. But I also think maybe she's learning things there. Maybe when she gets out eventually she'll be nicer to kids and people will give her a second chance." Sarah's heart swelled with pride. Despite everything she'd been through, Emma had grown into a remarkably kind, empathetic child. The scar on her shoulder had faded significantly to just a thin line, barely visible anymore. But it was there, a permanent reminder of pain, but also of survival, of family reunited, of second chances that changed everything. "You're a good person, Emma Rose Carter," James said softly. "Better than most adults I know." "That's because I have good parents," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "Even if it took you guys a while to figure things out and find each other again." Sarah and James both laughed. Emma had heard an age-appropriate version of how her parents had found each other again. She'd forgiven them both for the lost years, saying simply and wisely, "You're here now. That's what matters most." As the plane soared smoothly through clear blue skies, Sarah thought about that terrible day 2 years ago. How trauma and violence had paradoxically brought them all together. How the absolute worst moment of their lives had somehow led to healing they didn't even know they desperately needed. Karen Hendricks still had 6 more years left in prison. Sarah wondered sometimes if she'd truly changed, if she understood the real magnitude of what she'd done, if prison had broken through her entitlement or simply hardened it further. But mostly, Sarah didn't think about Karen at all anymore. She thought about Emma's bright laughter, about James's hand in hers, about the family they'd built carefully from broken pieces. They'd lost 8 precious years together, yes, but they had an entire lifetime stretching ahead of them now. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." James's voice came smoothly over the intercom system. "We're beginning our descent into Portland. Weather conditions are clear and beautiful. Temperature is a perfect 72 degrees. Thank you for flying with us today." Emma pressed her face eagerly against the small window, watching the world below grow steadily larger as they descended. "Look, Mom!" she exclaimed excitedly. "You can see our house from up here." Sarah moved to join her daughter, wrapping her arms lovingly around Emma from behind. James's hand found Sarah's shoulder, warm and reassuring. The three of them connected in this small space high above the world, a family finally complete. Below them, life continued its normal rhythms. People going to work, children playing in parks, families healing from their own wounds. And high above in that thin air where earth meets endless sky, three people who'd found each other against absolutely impossible odds flew steadily toward home. "Daddy?" Emma asked as they descended smoothly through wispy clouds. "When I'm older and I become a pilot like you, can we fly together? Like, can we both be pilots on the same plane?" James's voice was thick with emotion when he answered. "Baby girl, there's nothing in this entire world I'd love more than that." "And Mom can be our flight attendant," Emma suggested enthusiastically. Sarah laughed, shaking her head. "I get terrible air sickness, remember? Even just sitting here sometimes makes me queasy." "Oh yeah, I forgot," Emma giggled, that wonderful sound filling the small cockpit. "Okay, you can just be our very special passenger then, our favorite passenger who we love the most in the whole world." "Deal," Sarah whispered, kissing her daughter's dark hair tenderly. The plane touched down with barely a bump, James's skilled hands guiding them perfectly. As passengers began gathering their belongings and filing slowly out of the aircraft, Emma bounded energetically from the cockpit to hug both her parents tightly. "Best flight ever," she declared with absolute certainty. James and Sarah looked at each other over Emma's head, sharing a smile that held 8 years of painful separation, 2 years of difficult healing, and a lifetime of love still waiting to unfold before them. "Yeah," James agreed, pulling them both close against his chest. "Best flight ever, sweetheart." 3 months later, an unexpected letter arrived at Sarah's house. The return address showed it came from the State Women's Correctional Facility, from Karen Hendricks. Sarah almost threw it away unopened, but something made her hesitate. She showed it to James. "Do you want to read it?" he asked carefully. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "Part of me wants to just burn it, but another part needs to know if she's changed at all." They read it together that evening after Emma had gone to bed. "Dear Sarah and James, I don't expect you to read this letter. I don't deserve your attention or your time, but my therapist here says I need to write it anyway, so here it is. I think about Emma every single day, about her face in that courtroom, about the fear I caused her, about the pain I inflicted on an innocent child. Prison has given me time, too much time, to face who I became. I was a monster dressed in expensive clothes and fake politeness. I wielded rules and regulations like weapons against anyone I deemed beneath me. I turned my neighborhoods into kingdoms where I was the cruel queen and anyone different became my enemy. I can't take back what I did. I can't give Emma those hours of terror back. I can't undo the scar, the trauma, the nightmares she probably still has. But I can change who I am going forward. I work in the prison library now, helping other inmates learn to read and write. Many of them are immigrants, people I would have dismissed and despised before. I hear their stories now, their struggles, their dreams, their hopes for better lives for their children. I see their humanity, the humanity I absolutely refuse to see in you and your family. I'll be in here for at least 6 more years. When I get out, I'll be almost 70 years old. My old life is gone completely. My husband divorced me. My children won't speak to me. My reputation is destroyed. Good. That life was built on hatred, entitlement, and control. I hope Emma is happy and thriving. I hope she's forgotten me entirely. I hope your family has healed and is living the beautiful life you all deserve. You won. Not because the justice system punished me, but because you refused to let my hatred destroy you. You refused to let my cruelty break your family apart. You stood strong together, and you won. I lost absolutely everything, and you lost nothing that truly matters. That's real justice." Sarah folded the letter carefully, her hands trembling slightly. Do you think she's really changed? She asked James. I don't know, James said honestly. Maybe. Prison changes some people for the better. But it doesn't really matter to us anymore, does it? No, Sarah agreed. She's part of our past, not our future. They burned the letter in their fireplace that night, watching the paper curl and blacken and turn to ash. It felt symbolic somehow, releasing the last hold Karen Hendricks had on their family, letting go of the anger and pain. That weekend, they sat together in their backyard, the yard Sarah had carefully landscaped with colorful flowers and a vegetable garden. Emma played with her friends from school, their laughter filling the warm air like music. Sophia leaned against James, his arm around her shoulders. We made it through, she said softly. We actually made it through everything. We did, James agreed, because we had each other, because we refused to let hate win. Emma ran up to them suddenly, dirt on her knees, joy radiating from her face. Daddy, Mom, look! She held up 3 perfect red tomatoes she'd picked from the garden. I grew these, all by myself. Those are beautiful, baby, James said proudly. The best tomatoes I've ever seen. Can we make salsa like Grandma taught me? Emma asked eagerly. Absolutely, Sarah smiled. We'll make it together, all 3 of us. Emma hugged them both tightly before running back to play with her friends. Sarah and James sat quietly, watching their daughter, their miracle, play without fear, laugh without hesitation, love without reservation. This was worth fighting for. Not the house or the neighborhood or proving any point. This, family, love, joy, belonging, safety, home. Karen Hendricks had tried to take it all away with one violent act. But love proved stronger than hate. Forgiveness proved more powerful than vengeance. Family proved unbreakable when built on truth. The Rodriguez family, no, the Carter family now, didn't just survive their trauma. They thrived, they grew, they bloomed. And that, Sarah realized as she watched Emma's pure happiness, was the very best kind of victory. Not destroying your enemy, but refusing to be destroyed. Not seeking revenge, but choosing healing. Not letting hate win, but letting love triumph. Thank you, Sarah said quietly to James. For what? He asked. For giving us a second chance. For forgiving me. For being the father Emma always deserved. James kissed her forehead gently. Thank you for being brave enough to tell me the truth that day, even though it was the worst possible circumstances. Thank you for giving me Emma, for giving us this. They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Emma's laughter rang out clear and bright. Their family was complete. Their home was full of love. And high above, planes continued crossing the sky, carrying people home, bringing families together, connecting hearts across impossible distances. Just like they had been connected that terrible, miraculous day at 30,000 feet. The end.